All right. Good morning and welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. All right. Just wrapping up a couple things here real quick, sharing a couple feeds. If you will, share this episode, folks. That's how the show grows. And I will apologize for my tardiness this morning. I was trying to wrap it up. I think this is going to be a good one. Also, I was trying to figure out something with the chat. I can't seem to get into the chat. I was trying to send a message and I can't. So if somebody's out there watching right now, if you would do me a solid, just throw up a comment in the chat because for whatever reason, oh, there it goes. Finally. I don't know what was going on with that. So, but okay, so it looks like I was able to get that chat out there, and yeah, I think we're doing good. Okay, let me test one more time. Test. There it goes. Okay, so I don't know. Whatever it is, it is. So, all right, folks, we're gonna get into this today. So, immigration power grab, how the federal government. I'm gonna be stirring up I'm going to ruffle some feathers today. How the federal government, took what the founders never gave. That's the topic today. So I want to lead with this video that just recently came out from Trump. He was talking about, oh, you guys got to lighten up. He's talking about immigration. So let's hear what he has to say.
Many countries opened up their prisons and dropped them into the United States. Those are the people who are getting out. And we have a lot of heart. They said, you got to lighten up on this.
Uh-oh. Oh, boy. You got to lighten up. Who has to lighten up? Well, let's see.
We have a lot of heart for people. They came in illegally, but they're good people, and they're working now on farms, and they're working in luncheonettes and hotels and all. And we're looking to get the criminals out right now, the criminals. And I think it's very important. I mean, every once in a while you see a story, we take somebody. He should be out because they came in illegally. So in theory, they should be, but we're focused on
In theory, they should be. Hmm, that's pretty amazing. He's went from all the rhetoric of we're gonna mass deportations, we're getting millions out, we're gonna clean up this country, them dirty, no good, rotten immigrants coming over here and taking all our gerbs. And now he's like, well, in theory, they really shouldn't be here, but you gotta lighten up, guys. Come on, chill out. He's like, I just rescheduled marijuana. Take a puff or two. He didn't say that. I'm interjecting.
the murderers, the drug dealers, the mentally insane. We have a lot of mentally insane killers. I mean, you can't even talk to them. It'd be nice if you could have a little reason, but you can't even reason. These are seriously ill people. You have a couple of countries where they were loaded up. Their mental institutions and insane asylums were loaded to the gills. They couldn't get. They're empty now. But they're filling up because we're bringing them all back. We know where they came from. And every country accepts them. Under Biden, they wouldn't say, they had so little respect that they'd bring them there and they wouldn't take them. They say, get the hell out of here. They would be bringing a plane in to land in a country.
All right. As a clip I found on the internet, sorry that it ended so abruptly. So that's what I'm leading with. We're going to talk about it today. I got two questions that I want to try to answer. Number one, did the Constitution grant, or does the Constitution grant immigration authority to the federal government? That's the first question. The second one is, whether it did or not, is it even feasible to remove all illegal immigrants? And when we say illegal immigrants, we're talking about anybody that is here without legal permission. Okay? Like they came here, even if they're working and they're otherwise good people. The only violation was coming in here without permission. I'm including those, as well as anybody that's here that overstayed their visa, and including all of those who committed violent crimes. So the test for the question, is it feasible to remove all illegal immigrants, is whether it's feasible to remove anybody here illegally, regardless of how they're behaving. By the end of the episode, I hope to demonstrate that the answer to both of these questions is clearly no. So what I want to do, I want to start with the Constitution, which was ratified in 1788 and then basically effective in 1789. Okay, so we're going to go to Article 1, Section 8, because people that say the federal government has the power for immigration, and there's a lot of big accounts out there that'll say, some of them claim to be libertarian, right? I don't know where their reading skills went, but we're gonna challenge that, and we're gonna see, is that true? And they always point out Article 1, Section 8. So let's check it out. So I've got it up on the screen here, and let me put this over here real quick. It says and I'm citing two clauses here. This is from the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. This is Clause 3 and 4. The whole Section 8 is much larger. It's not all relevant to the conversation today. Here's what it says. The Congress shall have power. And then it goes through and lists all the points. And then Clause 3 says, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes. And then in Clause 4, it says, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States. So these are the two clauses that are relevant. Now, we're going to get to the Commerce Clause shortly. We'll set that one aside. Let's start with the Naturalization Clause, which is Clause 4. And notice that it says nothing about immigration. Now, at first, some may argue that it was an oversight, naturalization and immigration are the same, or even that oversight of one requires oversight of another. That's actually pretty dishonest for two reasons. Number one, the founders often quarreled over word choice. For example, George Mason wanted maladministration added to the high crimes and misdemeanors clause, but Madison and others thought that word was too vague. And there are other examples. If you go back through history, you can find examples where they argued over word choice. So the idea that, oh, we can be flexible with the word naturalization, it also includes immigration. No, not according to history, not according to the evidence of the fact that the people who wrote this were very particular about their word choices. The other reason that this is dishonest is if you think about it today, Second Amendment proponents, which there's an overlap between Second Amendment proponents and people who support mass deportation. Okay, there's an overlap, a huge overlap. It's not quite a circle, but there's an overlap. Proponents of the Second Amendment are happy to point out that the word militia had a very specific meaning when their opponents, modern day opponents, try and suggest that it meant anything other than regular people. So it's like, okay, well, in this part of the Constitution, you will argue today and say, no, 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 that's not what the word meant. Words have meanings. But then over here, you might be more willing to be like, well, I don't know, naturalization, immigration, they have shun at the end of it. Close enough. No, stop being dishonest. But there are even better reasons to distinguish between naturalization and immigration. So let's move on to the Declaration of Independence, which was written in 1776. So let's take a look at what we've got written here. This is one of the grievances that was listed in the Declaration of Independence. And it says this is one of the grievances by the 13 colonies that rejected British rule. It says, he has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. So, prevent the population of these states. What does population of these states mean? That means growth. The king prevented the growth of their states by obstructing the laws of naturalization and refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations. In other words, they're like, look, one of the grievances we have, you're not allowing us to grow. How do you grow? Anybody want to wager a guess? Where are all my buttons here, my sounds? If you said migration, immigration is how you grow. Do I get it? No? There it goes. A little delay. That's okay. Let's do this. Where are you here? Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Whatever. Well, but if you said that, you're correct. That's how this works. Colonists knew that immigration was important for growing the colony. Okay? But if that's not enough, right? Declaration of Independence isn't enough. A plain reading of the Constitution isn't sufficient. Let's look at Federalist number 42, which was written in 1788. So we move on to that one. And I'm going to be going through paragraphs 37 to 40. Okay, we're going to break these down. So here's paragraph 37. It says the dissimilarity in the rules of naturalization has long been remarked as a fault in our system and as laying a foundation for intricate and delicate questions. Okay? In other words, each state had its own naturalization rules, varying residency periods, requirements, etc., and that created inconsistencies and potential legal conflicts across state lines. The lack of uniformity made citizenship unpredictable and messy in this union of states. That's what we're saying. We're like, hey, we got a problem here, right? And remember, this is written about the Articles of Confederation. They're like, hey, we've got some failures here that we need to address. So now let's move on to paragraphs 38 and 39. I split them up into two different pages just because, or two different graphics, so that we can keep everything on the screen. So here's 38. It says, in the fourth article of the Confederation, so we are talking about the Articles of Confederation, it is declared that the free inhabitants of each of these states, paupers, vagabonds, and fugitives from justice, excepted, shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of free citizens in the several states, and the people of each, where'd I go here? Each state shall in every other enjoy all the privileges of trade and commerce. And then in paragraph 39, it goes on to say, there is a confusion of language here, which is remarkable. Why the terms free inhabitants are used in one part of the article, free citizens in another, and people in another, cannot be easily determined. So, what Madison is pointing out is that there's sloppy wording in Article 4 of the Articles of Confederation. It ambiguously granted privileges and immunities to free inhabitants, non citizens and residents, in other states, potentially giving them more rights elsewhere than in their home state. This muddled language risked states undermining each other's citizenship standards. And then we move on, and again, we've got two slides here. Federalist 42 again, paragraph 40. Now, this is all the same paragraph. It just was longer. So what it says, it seems to be a construction scarcely avoidable, however, that those who came under the denomination of free inhabitants of a state, although not citizens of such state, are entitled in every other state to all the privileges of free citizens of the latter. It then goes on to say, but were an exposition of the term inhabitants to be admitted, which would confine the stipulated privileges to citizens alone. The difficulty is diminished only, not removed. The very improper power would still be retained by each state of naturalizing aliens in every other state. In other words, even if privileges were limited to citizens, states retained the power to naturalize aliens who then gained rights nationwide. A lenient state could effectively override a stricter state's rules by granting citizenship quickly, making one state's laws paramount in another state's territory. Okay, so notice, what I want you to notice here is the key focus isn't immigration itself, but the matter of naturalization. That is, who gets to become a citizen. The concern is about the opportunity for aliens to potentially game the system by starting in a lenient state, gaining citizenship, and then moving to a less lenient state who would then be forced to recognize the citizenship. What isn't of any concern is the matter of immigration itself. There's no concern here. They're not talking about, hey, we got to restrict them. They're not talking about, hey, this state could allow people to come in that we don't want. No, the whole concern here is naturalization. And it says nothing about the movement of anyone. So then, if that's not enough, if you're like, okay, DL, you got me on the Constitution, a plain reading of it, and maybe you have a point on the Declaration of Independence, and maybe the Federalist Papers also make a good point. If you're like, but still, whatever, I don't know what argument you're going with now, but let's just say that wasn't enough. Let's talk about some court rulings. Now, I'm not going to put these up on the screen, okay? Just because there's too much there, and I'm just going to tell you about them. You can go and look them up. I've got the links in the show notes. You can go read them yourself. I encourage you to do it. They're not very long. I take it back. I think one is very long. One is like 60 pages. The other one's like 10 pages or something like that. So let's start with this court ruling in 1837, New York versus Milne. So this was an early Supreme Court case testing state power over arriving passengers, essentially an immigration-related regulation against Federal Commerce Authority. In 1824, New York passed a law requiring the master of any vessel arriving in New York Harbor from foreign ports or other U.S. states to report detailed passenger information within 24 hours. This included names, ages, places of birth, last legal settlements, and occupations. The goal was to identify potential paupers or public charges so the city could take steps like requiring bonds or removal to prevent them from burdening local taxpayers. The case arose when the ship Emily, commanded by William Thompson, arrived from abroad in August of 1829 with 100 passengers. The master failed to file the required report, and the city of New York sued the ship's owner, George Milne, for penalties up to $75 per unreported passenger, totaling potentially thousands of dollars. Milne argued the law was unconstitutional because it regulated foreign commerce, a power reserved to Congress under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, which we just saw a few moments ago. The Supreme Court ruled 6-1 in favor of New York. They upheld the law as a valid exercise of state police power, not a regulation of commerce. Justice Philip P. Barber wrote the majority opinion, emphasizing that the law targeted the internal welfare of the state after passengers landed. The act was precautionary police legislation to guard against moral pestilence, like paupers, vagabonds, or convicts, similar to quarantines, health laws, or inspection rules that states retained under the 10th Amendment. Now, before I finish telling you about this, does that sound at all familiar about what people are saying today? Well, we need to remove all these immigrants because, they're not saying the words moral pestilence, where a few hundred years later we use different terms, but they're basically making the same argument. They're pointing out, they're like, hey, they'll say things like, if you can't protect your borders, you don't have a country. Okay. Have you paid attention to history lately? Have you looked into it? Let's continue on about this particular case. Barber, the Supreme Court justice, stressed no direct conflict with federal laws. There were existing U.S. passenger acts from 1799 and 1819 that focused on voyage safety, not post-landing burdens. Okay, he said states could protect their citizens from financial strain without encroaching on Congress's domain. Does that sound familiar today? Financial strain, as in like, hey, we got to protect ourselves from all these immigrants coming over here and jumping on welfare. Okay. He's arguing, Philip Barber, Justice Barber, is arguing and saying states can do this and they're not in violation of federal authority. Let's see, where was I in my notes? The court had certified back to the lower court that the relevant part of New York's law was constitutional and did not regulate commerce with foreign ports. However, that was in 1837. That was that ruling. We scroll forward a few years and we get to 1875. We get Chai Lung versus Freeman. This was in California. In August of 1874, the steamship Japan arrived in San Francisco from China carrying 22 women passengers, including Chai Lung. Under a California state law, the state's Commissioner of Immigration, can I just point out, for anybody that, like, this alone should be a big, huge red flag when people say, well, this authority was granted to the federal government by the Constitution. And then you have to say, well, why is it that the state of California had a commissioner of immigration? And at the time, the federal government did not. Anyway, so under a California state law, the state's commissioner of immigration boarded the ship and singled out these women. Traveling with male guardians, he singled them out as being, quote, lewd and debauched, basically prostitutes. He just basically looked at them and said, y'all look like you're here to give people some happy hours. No, not some happy time. No, what is it? Me love you long, whatever. Who cares? That wasn't in my notes. I was trying to kind of do that on the fly. Anyway, so he basically assumed that they were prostitutes just by looking at them. The law required the ship's master to post a $500 gold bond for each woman to cover any future public support cost for 2 years or the women couldn't land. That's amazing. The state law said, hey, if you seem to be somebody that the taxpayers are going to have to maybe pay for in the future, or you're going to burden the citizens, the person bringing you has to post some money in order to pay for that, so that the citizens don't have to. It's a novel idea. It's amazing. It's almost like the founders knew what they were doing. Anyway, if the bond wasn't posted, the women faced detention or they were forced to return to China. The master refused to post the bonds, so Chai Lung and the others were held as prisoners. They challenged this, but the California courts, they upheld the law as a valid exercise of state police power to protect against undesirable immigrants. The U.S. Supreme Court reversed this unanimously. Justice Miller's opinion struck down the California statute as unconstitutional. He argued that the power to regulate the admission of foreign nationals, deciding who can land from international voyages, belongs exclusively to Congress under the Commerce Clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. Again, he argued this because transporting passengers from foreign ports is a part of commerce with foreign nations. Now that's weird, okay? Because his argument is, hey, transporting people is commerce. And California can't say you look like a prostitute. The person bringing you has to put out some money so that the citizens don't have to pay for you later, because we don't want these kind of people. This is a really weird contradiction. So going on, the court said states could make reasonable police regulations for things like quarantines or excluding clear criminals or paupers, but California's law went way beyond that. It gave the commissioner broad subjective discretion to classify and block people with a clear revenue-raising motive. Because, I don't know if you know this, but the commissioner of immigration got a cut of the fees. Huh. Amazing. Isn't it weird how when there's government power and there's monetary incentive, that government power can be abused? Like if I'm the commissioner of immigration and I get on a boat and I'm like, these Chinese women, they totally look like prostitutes to me. They're coming over here, to do all these, to give some Asian massages. And then coincidentally, if I tell them that they have to give up $500, then I might, have a little extra money to take my lady out. Weird how that works. Anyway, it gave the commissioner broad subjective discretion to classify and block people with clear revenue-raising motive. And it risked creating international incidents, since only the federal government handles foreign relations. States couldn't expose the whole nation to diplomatic conflicts over arbitrary exclusions. So the result? The law was void and the women were ordered released. This case marked a key step toward federal exclusivity in immigration admission, even though, at the time, Congress had not yet passed any broad federal immigration laws. So at the time, and if you can go back and you can look, you'll see that we've already covered New York, we've covered California. Other states had some of their own laws regarding immigration. So it's kind of weird when people say the Constitution grants the federal government, because I'm like, how did they not know this for 80 some years? Anyway, there are other court rulings, but these two are basically sufficient to make the point. In 1837, the Supreme Court ruled such laws did not violate the Commerce Clause, but in 1875, a different Supreme Court said the opposite on the basis of fear of how it may affect relationship with China. Okay, it's worth pointing out that there were narrower alternatives the court could have used in Chai Lung versus Freeman. They just chose not to. So I'll give you three potentials. Okay, number one, they could have invalidated solely on the statute's arbitrary, discretionary nature and lack of due process. So the law, again, as we pointed out, gave the commissioner unchecked subjective power to classify passengers. So he got on there and he said, these are lewd and debauched women, prostitutes. And he did it based on appearance. Like there was no trial, no evidence, no hearing. A narrower ruling could have held that this violated basic fairness principles and due process or general constitutional limits on state police powers. And they could have done that without overreaching or reaching federal exclusivity. Another option could have been they struck it down as a disguised revenue tax scheme, because that's what it was, rather than genuine police protection. The court repeatedly emphasized the law's manifest purpose. And they said, hey, this is extortion and revenue raising, right? Because the commissioner kept like some 20% of the commutation fees. And the funds went to the state treasury, not immigrant relief or bond. And then bonds and commutations were discretionary and excessive. So for those reasons, they could have been like, yeah, this is just you trying to get money for you and for the state. You're not actually protecting the state. A narrower decision could have invalidated as an improper state tax on foreign commerce or passengers, right? And there's other legal precedent which plays a role in this. And they could have done that while preserving state authority for bona fide protective measures. So they could have been like, look, you're abusing people financially, and here are the reasons that we already have why this is illegitimate and why you cannot do this. But you can still protect your state. You can still stop immigrants from coming in if you feel that they are actually in some way a danger to the citizens of your state. And a third option was they could limit the holding to the statute's overbreadth or excess beyond vital necessity for self protection. Justice Miller, who, by the way, I said it was unanimous, Justice Miller wrote the opinion of the court. There was no dissenting opinion because it was 9-0. So Justice Miller explicitly said that the court is not deciding whether states can protect against paupers, criminals, or public charges in the absence of federal law. He said, quote, we are not called upon to decide for or against the right of a state to protect herself by necessary and proper laws against paupers and convicted criminals from abroad. Such a right can only arise from a vital necessity and cannot be carried beyond the scope of that necessity. In other words, a narrower ruling could have confined the invalidation to laws that go so far beyond what is necessary or even appropriate, leaving open narrower state police powers. Basically, they could have said, you're taking it too far. They said, you have these rights, but you're going way too far. And it's beyond the necessity of self protection, right? Whatever it is, whether it's extortion. So they could have left out the extortion and just said, you're going too far. It could have been that. All right. But they chose not to. All right. In other words, the judicial branch stole power from the states. Now, what's ironic about all of this, when you think about it in terms of today, states were actually stricter on borders than our U.S. is today. Maybe not all of them, but some of them were. And the ones that weren't could have been. So all the people crying today about like, oh, if you don't have a border, if you don't protect your borders, you don't have a country. I mean, once upon a time, the argument really was, hey, if states don't protect their borders, they don't have a state. And they were totally permitted to do that. Another ironic thing is that the Supreme Court claimed power without any precedent. So if you go read it, and I read it, it's only 10 pages, you'll see that they didn't draw upon any past precedent. They just said, hey, China, this is our domain. That's basically what he said. They did it in legal language, right? There's no precedent. What would we call that today? We would call that judicial activism. So all people like, oh, these federal judges that are blocking Trump, they're just judicial activists. How do you think the federal government got this power in the first place? Through judicial activism. You're just ignorant. Another irony, the U.S. was actually trying to play nice with China, while today we're pretty much told that they are our adversaries and they're a threat to us. So I think it's kind of interesting. Like, the tables have completely turned. And then lastly, for all the talk about states' rights and decentralization, because these conversations were had like 2 years ago, a year ago, I saw a lot of major accounts, right-wing accounts, decentralization, it's time for a divorce, states' rights, right? They were saying all these things. And proponents of federal oversight of immigration today, they seem to ignore that we had that very thing. We had it. All the things that they claim that they want, all the arguments that they make, we had that. And it was constitutional. Not only by a plain reading, but when you look at the Federalist Papers, when you look at Supreme Court rulings, when you look at the Declaration of Independence, they all match. But the federal government controlling immigration does not match with any of that until after the Supreme Court said, this is now your power. It wasn't the first 80 years of our country. The first, like roughly 80 years, it's like 83 or 84, but it's like the first 80 years of our country, states managed immigration. That's the first 1/3 of this country's existence. 1/3 of the country's existence. It was not the federal government's job to manage immigration. And I'll point this out. Where do I have that up anymore? I don't think I have it up. I can't show it up on the screen because I don't have. Yeah, I think I closed that one. That's okay. If you go to the, UCI, the United States Customs and Immigration Services, USCIS website, they will point out that the federal, on their own website, go find it, go to their history. They point out that the Office of Immigration was created in 1891. 1891. So we have the Declaration of Independence in 1776. We have 1788, we get the Constitution, right? Let me see. I'm trying to look for some of my notes here. The 10th Amendment was 1791. This Supreme Court case, which kind of gave federal power, was 1875. And then finally, in 1891, the Congress creates the Office of Immigration formally. That's what, like, when you look at the timeline, it doesn't make sense. People's arguments fall flat. Now, I want to show you one last clip, one last video. This comes from the 10th Amendment Center. Those guys are great. I love them. You should definitely give them a follow wherever they are on social media, and they're all over the place. I want to play this video. This is actually from 2019, and this is Michael Bolden. He's discussing the feasibility of mass deportations. So I want you to listen to what he had to say.
Hear from Sarah Pierce, a lawyer. She quoted all the numbers going a little bit further back. In Obama's era, back in 2013 and 2014, they were way higher than what the Trump administration was doing. In 2013, it was 133,000. It dropped to 102, then to 69. The lowest level there was 65, and then you see it going back up. Over a period of about 6 years, we're looking at an average of about 90,000 deportations. Removal operations, interior. Overall, if you add border removals, it's about 250,000 per year. In 2016, it was 240,000. In 2017, it was 226. 2018, it went up to 256. In Obama's years, the numbers were not much different. They are not significantly different. They're generally about 250,000 per year. So here's the bottom line. If the feds are somehow able to magically reduce illegal border crossings to zero and keep it there permanently, year after year after year, no more illegal border crossings, and no more cities and states become these immigration sanctuary cities or immigration sanctuary states.
I want to pause it here for just a second to kind of clarify what he's talking about. So the video here that I'm drawing from, I think it's like a 30-minute video, maybe it's like 25 minutes. Go check it out. It's in the show notes. But early on, he's talking about the number of sanctuary states and sanctuary cities. And I've talked about this in the past. People misunderstand what a sanctuary state or city is. All that is when the state or the city has passed legislation that says, in our state, the government is prohibited from working with the federal government when it comes to immigration. That's all it is. And it is completely legal because it is not the case that states or cities or locales that they are required to enforce federal laws. That's not their job. Their job is to worry about the states within their own state. So what ends up happening is if a state could have a a law that says we explicitly forbid any government entity from working with the federal government on the matter of immigration. Okay. Now that doesn't mean they can obstruct it. They can't do things to get in the way. They can just basically say, I don't have to help, right? I don't have to give you any information. I don't have to do your work for you. I just simply don't have. That's all that it's saying. Okay. And then other states, and Florida is one of them, they have the opposite. They have an explicit legislation that says our state, the government is required to assist on some level, right? And so we have that in Florida. That's completely legal. And so people that want to argue the point, they will have to argue why it would be legal for Florida to require its government to assist, whereas another state, like say Colorado, is not legal for them to require their governing bodies to be hands off, right? But again, this is not obstruction. You cannot obstruct. That's a different matter. They're just saying you cannot help. So in the absence of either law, then it would be up to the local cities. So in theory, you could have Florida. Let's say that we didn't have any law whatsoever managing either way. Then you could have, say, Jacksonville that says, all right, Jacksonville City Council could say, we are a sanctuary city, and Miami could say, we are not. And then they both could, one could work with the federal government, the other one could not, right? Based on their local legislation. But in our case, the state has said everybody has to assist. So I just wanted to point that out. And he's also, in the context of that, he's pointing out the number of personnel that the federal government has. So he's pointing out, like, the federal government simply doesn't have the personnel required to manage all of this, and they rely on the fact that states to assist them. But states do not have to assist them. So that's what he's talking about here.
If we use a figure, let's say, of 13 million undocumented immigrants or illegal immigrants in the country, I realize some people might say that's high and other people might say that it's low. It's going to take them about 50 years to do removal operations of everyone in the country illegally. 50 years at full capacity. Now, if we're just talking the ability to do about 90,000 per year of interior removals, then it's significantly higher. We're looking at over 100 years to be able to do it. Now, I'm saying around 50 because if they don't have to do any more removals at the border, you're not even counting that because they've shut down the border somehow, they can move those resources to interior enforcement. So I'm using a very aggressive number of about 250,000. And that's if there are no more illegal border crossings. That's if there are no more new sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. And we're still talking 50 to 100 years to be able to get all the illegal immigrants, the undocumented immigrants here in the country back to their country of origin. In other words, anyone who's telling you that this is going to happen is either living in a total fantasy world or they're lying to you or both.
All right. So there you have it. In 2019, the 10th Amendment Center came out and they said, this cannot happen. The math isn't mathing. It just can't. And then I've just walked you through our historical documents and I showed you right there. You could go look them up. I got the links all throughout the show notes. You can go through and you can read everything yourself and you can say, wow, according to history, the federal government was not managing immigration until 1891. And it wasn't until 1875 that the power was vested in them by the courts, because the court absolutely came out and said, this is a power that is vested in the federal government Commerce Clause. And I've said before on this show, the Commerce Clause and what is the other one? The Commerce Clause and I forgot now, drawing a blank. But that's one of the ways that the federal government has repeatedly grabbed a lot of power. Okay, so like if like there's no evidence to support Article 1, Section 8 grants the federal government power over immigration. It does not exist. I don't care how many followers somebody has. That doesn't make it any more correct. That just makes perhaps them more egregiously incorrect because now they are making that argument without any evidence. And if they argue, and if they want to point to it, you can say, okay, fine. Tell me about between 1788 and 1875. Tell me show me the evidence between those 2 years, the first 80 years of this country. You show me where the federal government had that authority. They can't because it doesn't exist. All right, let me get to some comments here. All right, so I am able to get some comments on the screen, not quite like I wanted to. Okay, I've like throw them all up there. So I've made progress, so we're getting there. All right. So Joe here says there's no such thing as illegal immigration. At the federal level, I would agree. At the state level, according to our documents, our governing documents, that would not be true. Now, if you want to make the libertarian argument that government cannot restrict the freedom of movement, that's an entirely separate argument. I am only speaking about our governing documents because that is what some 300 million, roughly 300 million Americans have to work with. Most of them are not familiar with libertarianism or libertarians. Half of them couldn't even tell you what a libertarian is. They couldn't identify fundamental principles of libertarianism. So I think it's wise of us to say, okay, well, in a libertarian utopia, this music is a little bit loud. In a utopia, then perhaps we can have that conversation. But for right now, we're not even close to where we are supposed to be with our own governing documents and our own history. Joe goes on to say, neither are relevant to immigration. Okay, that must have been about something else. And then he said F court rulings. Kind of, sort of. I mean, because I want you to think about this. When it was New York versus Milne, well, they ruled that it was not a violation of the Commerce Clause. But then when we get to Chai Lung versus Freeman, well, that was ruled, oh, it is a violation of the Commerce Clause. So you could F all the court rulings, but I would argue that some court rulings are actually correct and they make better arguments. And those are the ones that we should look at and say, yes, according to our governing documents, according to the way this country was set up, that was a good ruling. Because there are good rulings and there are bad rulings. And it's worth us as citizens spending a little time reading up and becoming more knowledgeable so that we can be the citizens that we were supposed to be, right? And again, I'm distinguishing between any libertarian ideas and what we have as, a constitution and the way it was set up. So that's my show today, folks. Hope you found it informative and inspiring. And if you're watching later, please drop me a comment. Let me know your thoughts. Did I miss something? Do I need to offer a correction? Maybe you want to be promiscuous with praise and just be like, DL, wow, this was an amazing 45 minutes. You did a wonderful job of breaking down why it is that the U.S. federal government does not technically have the power to regulate immigration, right? Now, they have the power because they stole it, because it was stolen. So in theory, it's kind of like a might makes right. They have the power in that sense. But when we look at our history, when we look at our governing documents, when we looked at what people were concerned about back at the time that they were having these discussions, there is no evidence that the federal government has that power, not from the Constitution. With that being said, I want to tell you guys tonight, I will be on again at 7 p.m. I have a guest. What is his name? Let's see. I'm going to be having on where did it go? Lost his. Give me a second. Let me take a look here. Where did it go? Did I move it? I must have moved it. Oh, where did you go? I lost it. Give me a second. I'm sure I can find it. Where's his name? Well, I had the show notes there. I had the show notes for that show, and then I seem to have lost them. So give me a second here. Well, that's unfortunate. Let me see here. Let me look. Give me a second. Oh, yeah. Thomas Lane for U.S. Senate out of Iowa. I couldn't remember his name. So Thomas Lane is running for U.S. Senate out of Iowa as a libertarian. He will be on with me tonight at 7 p.m. Look forward to that. You might remember if you were watching a couple of weeks ago, I had an equipment malfunction. I was not able to stream, and he had showed up on time. He even had a suit and a tie on, and it was like 6:30 in the morning for him. So kudos to that. Not to say that every candidate has to wear a suit and a tie, but I think for a Senate run, it's probably wise, very wise. So I look forward to having that conversation with him tonight. So check me out tonight, 7 p.m. That's going to be awesome. But for now, I'm out. I will see you guys tonight and then tomorrow. You know that I'm all about supporting organizations that hold my values. Make sure you head on over to blackgunsmatter.shop. They've got apparel, stickers, and more. Use the code LibertyDad, all one word, at checkout to score a 10% discount. Or just hit the referral link in the show notes. That'll make it so much easier. Remember, I'm not just a voice on a mic. I'm a dad who's working hard to deliver to you the best libertarian content. Connect with me on Linktree, where you'll find links to my Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, because, you know, every bit helps keep this show rolling. Plus, you can find me on my other platforms to stay in the loop. With your help, this show, The Message of Liberty, will be seen and heard by more people. As always, I appreciate you tuning in